Priests are the main music makers in the Bible, but they don't start out that way. Priests do make music at the tabernacle. They're the ones who have the silver trumpets. They blow those silver trumpets at certain particular times. They blow the trumpets in order to summon Israel to worship. They blow the trumpets when the camp that's in the wilderness pulls up camp and begins to continue their journey through the wilderness. Sometimes they blow the trumpets to assemble the people for war. They blow those trumpets at Jericho and bring the walls of Jericho down. But other than those silver trumpets, we don't read about any kind of musical instruments that were used in the tabernacle. And so far as we know, there is no music in the actual conduct of worship in the tabernacle. So far as we know, there's not actually any words said. We suspect that there are words said. We know that on the Day of Atonement, the high priest confesses the sins of Israel over the scapegoat. So he was saying something then. But there's no indication of a script that he's following in the other sacrifices, and certainly no indication of music. But that all changes when the tabernacle dies and rises again and comes back into existence as the temple. In fact, it begins before the temple is actually built. As soon as David begins to prepare for the temple, as he brings the ark into Jerusalem in a great procession, that procession is accompanied by Levitical singers and by Levitical instrumentalists. It's accompanied by music. The Lord is ascending with a shout, with song. The Lord is ascending to take his throne in Jerusalem through an ascent of music. And then once the temple is built, then you have a very strictly organized, elaborately organized system of music. You have choirs, Levitical choirs. You have Levitical instrumentalists, and they begin to make music along with the sacrifices that are offered in the temple. And so we move from the tabernacle to the temple from a worship that, so far as we know, we suspect that things were said, but so far as we know, did not include any music, into a form of worship that's primarily not just sacrificial, cutting up and burning animals, but all that is accompanied by song. And one of the interesting thing that goes on at this period is that the theology of sacrifice begins to transfer over to the theology of music. We see this particularly in the books of Chronicles, the way that the books of Chronicles describes the musical life of the temple. It uses terminology that Leviticus and Exodus use to describe the sacrifices, but it's applying them down to music. John Kleinig, an Australian Lutheran scholar, wrote a book called The Lord's Song, which is all about this. My little book, From Silence to Song, is about this transfer. So song is a memorial, just as the sacrifices were a memorial. You offer sacrifice in order to remind God of his promises and to remind God of what he's done in the past so that he'll act in the same way in the future. And now Israel is accompanying the smoke of the sacrifice with song. The smoke of the sacrifice goes up, the breath of the Levites goes up, the vibrating air that comes out of the instruments goes up before the Lord. He smells and he hears and he responds. And that's described as a memorial, because now the musical sacrifice is taking over some of the role of the animal sacrifices. The music is described as work. The Hebrew term is avodah. That's the same term that's used for the work of the Levites when they're constructing and tearing down the tabernacle, when they're doing the various activities of the tabernacle. That's the avodah of the Levites. Now they have a new kind of work, a new kind of priestly work, and that's the priestly work of making music. So in those and other ways, the terminology of sacrifice gets transferred over to music. And so we know that music is taking on more and more of these sacrificial qualities. And in the temple, the music making is an essential part of the sacrificial worship of Israel. As Israel moves from the relative silence of the tabernacle worship to the song and sound of the temple worship, that song and sound of the temple worship is fulfilled in the new living temple of the church.